Chapter 18:10, Beautiful Gift. Sonny lingered for a few moments, then looked down and concentrated on setting the table. However, he couldn't help but throw glances at Nephi's, who was enjoying herself in the water. His gaze was a little heated, but he tried to control his emotions as best he could, knowing that she might sense the nature and intensity of his desire. He was sure that she already had. Maybe Nephi's did not mind, though. Sonny let out a quiet sigh. His shadow sense had expanded to envelop a vast area, reaching far and wide. From the sky to the bottom of the river, nothing could escape him. He knew that Neph could handle any danger hiding underwater, but he still felt protective. Today was her day off, which was an exceedingly rare event. So nothing was allowed to spoil it. Many kilometers away, a hideous monster was stealthily moving through the woods. Before it could take another step, though, shadows suddenly came alive all around it. The beast did not have any time to react or to let out a roar. It was swiftly pulled into the darkness and disappeared from sight. A few moments later, a stream of blood flowed out of the shadows. Sonny shook his head with reproach and continued pulling out snacks out of the picnic basket. There were all kinds of dishes for Nephi's to choose from, those she liked the most at the brilliant emporium. There was also a small brazier and a kettle to brew tea. He had prepared well. Eventually, Nephi's had enough fun and swam back to the shore. Sonny was standing there peacefully, enjoying the breeze. Rising from the water, she swept her hair back and looked at him with an easy smile. "Aren't you hot, Master Sunless, all alone there on the shore?" He hesitated for a moment. "Not really. I've prepared the food. Would you like?" Instead of answering, she looked at him for a moment, then moved her hand unhurriedly. In the next moment, Sonny was splashed with water. He froze. Oh, what just happened? His brain refused to process the information. Noticing his startled expression, Nephi's couldn't help but laugh. Her melodious laughter, so rare and beautiful, was carried away by the wind, and then she looked at him with a hint of a mischievous smile. Her tone was subtly teasing. "I feel a little cheated." Sonny stared at her silently for a few moments, then sighed deeply and lowered his head. Then the nebulous mantle dissolved into shadows. Immediately, the summer day seemed a little colder. The shadows hiding under the trees had grown deeper and darker. Their darkness, in turn, made sunlight more stark. Not wasting any time, Sonny pulled off his clothes. He was wearing a pair of simple black swimming trunks underneath his trousers. Finding them had given him a lot of trouble, actually, while he was preparing for the date. Everything else was fine, but something like that would usually be imported from the waking world. Obviously, Sonny had to run around the city a little to procure a suitable pair. The breeze caressed his naked skin, and at the same time, Nephi's looked at him with a strange intensity in her calm gray eyes. Sonny's body was not at all like what one would expect from a gallant and scholarly enchanter. It was lithe, with not a gram of fat covering the lean muscles. His figure looked like something chiseled from marble by an enamored sculptor. His flawless porcelain skin made his raven-black hair and dark eyes seem even darker. Most striking of all, though, was an intricate tattoo of a great serpent that coiled around his arms and torso. Contrasted against the fair skin, the black ink was like pure darkness. Every onyx scale of the coiling serpent was so vividly tattooed that it almost seemed alive. Sonny had summoned the serpent from Godgrave for a special purpose. He had not planned on revealing it in such a manner, though. Well, all his plans had gone astray ever since this morning. Nephi seemed a little startled by the sight. You have a tattoo." Sonny looked at his arms, then smiled pleasantly. "That I do." While she was gazing at him deeply, he sent a little essence into his muscles and jumped high into the air, then plummeted into the water like a cannonball, making sure that Nephi's was in the splash zone. "You!" In the next moment, she was doused with water from head to toe. Neff's eyes widened a little. Laughing, Sunny surfaced and then swam away from the shore. "You get back here." The water was cool and clear, washing away the summer heat from his body. Coming to a beach was indeed a really great idea. The two of them played in the water for a while. With her silver anklets, Nephis was like a mermaid. Sunny spent most of the time enjoying the sight of her moving gracefully underwater, so much so that he was starting to worry that he would be too distracted and accidentally drown. The water was pleasantly cool and incredibly clear. The sun, which had been high above them on the way to the beach, was slowly rolling down the horizon. At some point, Sunny left Nephis alone and swam far away from the shore, then held his breath and dove down. Reaching the depths of the river, he noticed what he was looking for, a stealthy nightmare creature that looked like a massive boulder. Once he swam close to it, though, the boulder split apart, revealing a jagged line. The abomination was like a monstrous abalone, and what had seemed like stone was its shell. Before the creature could swallow him, Sunny crushed the impregnable shell with his fist, and then spent some time thoroughly tearing the river beast apart. Eventually, he fished the soul shard out of its remains and pushed himself toward the surface. Soon, thoroughly hungry, Sunny and Nephis returned to shore. Pleasantly tired, they walked over to the picnic blanket and sat down. She looked at the food with glistening eyes. Before Nephis could eat anything, however, Sunny reached outward and opened his palm. The soul shard was laying on it. It was a bit different from how the usual rough crystals. This one was perfectly round and polished, glimmering with a beautiful nacre color. Nephis looked at it with curiosity. "What is this?" Sunny smiled. "Just something beautiful for you." She hesitated for a moment, then took it and studied the glimmering pearl for a few moments. Then her face bloomed with a bright smile. Bringing the pearl closer to her face, Nephis looked at Sunny with appreciation. Then she sighed. "I don't have a gift for you, though." Pushing a plate of sandwiches closer to her, Sunny laughed. "You are here, that's the best gift." "You are here, that's the best gift." Neff's smile grew a little wider. Such a smooth talker. Still, coming from Master Sunless, even the most trite compliment was too pleasant to hear. She looked down at the luminous pearl he had given her. It was merely an awakened soul shard, but the lustrous pearl was so pretty, glowing softly with an opalescent shine in her hand. Its beauty and uniqueness made it seem quite valuable. However, it was the intent behind the gift and the words that accompanied it that made Nephis like it a lot. She looked at him with a light smile. "I'll cherish it." Master Sunless usually wore his hair tied back neatly, but now it was loose and wet, falling to his shoulders like a waterfall of black silk. His skin was like white porcelain, with the onyx scales of the coiling serpent contrasted starkly against its smooth surface. His dark eyes were glistening in the sunlight. He looked lovely. Nephis stole a furtive glance at his chiseled body, then hid her agitation by biting into a flavorful sandwich. Her eyes closed slightly. Ugh. The sandwich was absolutely delicious. It was simply unfair. Her sight was already being assaulted by his figure, and now her taste was besieged by his incredible cooking. Which of her 5 senses would Master Sunless tackle next? Thinking that, Nephis tried not to blush. She had been a little flustered when he took off his clothes to jump into the water. He was much sharper than she had imagined. Nephis was used to being in the company of warriors, so she had seen her fair share of athletic bodies. But the contrast between his gentle demeanor and his lean, sculpted physique was too striking. Not to mention the detailed tattoo of the coiling serpent. It was so out of place on the body of the refined enchanter that Nephis had been given a pause. That tantalizing tattoo seemed like it had a history. Had Master Sunless been a delinquent once? For some reason, the thought was strangely exciting. Of course, she had a different suspicion about the origin of the serpent tattoo. Then there was the unexpected potency of his presence. She had known for a while that Master Sunless was in a habit of wearing a memory that dampened the impression people had of him, but she had not expected that he would be that impressive. His presence was subtle, but undeniable, very fitting for a man whose affinity lay with shadows. However, although she had paid attention to his appealing body and the unanticipated power of his dark presence, Nephis had been distracted by something else. When Master Sunless dismissed his mantle, there was another thing that was revealed. She had always felt that his longing was strangely muffled. It was there, but somewhat obscured from her senses. But when the black mantle came off, the burning heat of his desire was finally revealed to her in all its startling depth. It seemed that behind the humble, slightly melancholic exterior, Master Sunless was a man of great passion. That was why Nephis had been flustered. She had known that he felt a strong attraction to her, both on an emotional and physical level. However, it was quite a surprise to feel how deep that attraction went. It was not an unpleasant surprise, though, because Nephis felt a strong attraction, too. Otherwise, she wouldn't have agreed to see him in earnest. So, instead of being uncomfortable, she secretly felt pleased and flattered by his attention. Nephis had been grateful for the cold water at that time. It was all strange and not entirely like herself. She had never felt that way, at least not that she could remember. But being with Master Sunless spoke to something deep within her. He made her feel at ease, as if the two of them belonged together like two pieces of the same puzzle. He was just so pleasant to be around. She couldn't help herself. But that was fine. Nephis let go of these thoughts as she enjoyed the picnic prepared by Master Sunless. Everything was delicious. The tea was fragrant. The company was the best part. The glistening water, the rustling leaves, the embroidered blanket, the man sitting near her. It was all perfect, like the picture out of a book. She had not felt that relaxed in a long, long time. A disastrous war that would decide not only her own fate, but the fates of countless humans as well, was almost upon them. And yet, here she was, enjoying an idle day at a beach with a beautiful man. Nephis would have felt guilty about neglecting her responsibilities, but she knew that coming here today was also important. She was proficient with a sword and had spent countless hours practicing how to wield it. Therefore, she knew that pushing her body without reprieve only seemed appealing, but would never produce a good result. The body needed sufficient rest in order to grow stronger and absorb what it had learned. Otherwise, it would simply collapse, destroying all the progress. It was the same with the mind. Nephis had 1,000 issues to think about and 1,000 strategies to plan. But it would not be good to drive herself into delirium by never allowing herself to relax. The mind needed rest, too. Persistent mental fatigue and sleep deprivation would only make it dull. She knew all these things well. But she had realized only recently that the heart was just like the body and the mind. Her spirit needed reprieve from time to time as well. She couldn't just strain it endlessly and expect that nothing would break. Instead, she needed to maintain it carefully, just like she maintained her body and mind. So this idle time with Master Sunless was not irresponsible at all. There was no need to feel guilty about satisfying her desires. That was just her doing some much-needed maintenance on her weary heart. Today was perfect. Finishing the sandwich, Nephis leaned forward to pour herself some light wine. However, at that moment, Master Sunless reached forward as well, aiming for the tea kettle. Suddenly, their faces were terribly close. Nephis looked at his lips, thinking, I wonder, how soft would they feel to the touch? Sunny was enjoying the sight of Nephis consuming the food he had prepared delightedly. He did not speak much and just looked at her, feeling that the day was perfect. Everything went much better than he had anticipated. It was so blissful, in fact, that he unconsciously expected a cursed titan to fall on their heads out of nowhere. Then he had to remind himself that he wasn't fated anymore. So it will probably be fine. Still, his mouth was suddenly dry at the thought. Not thinking much about anything, Sonny reached for the tea kettle. But at the same time, Nephi's reached for the bottle of wine. Suddenly, their faces were terribly close. It was to the point that he could feel her breath on his cheek. The two of them remained motionless for a few moments, looking into each other's eyes. Neff's gaze was calm, but also made him feel hot. His own gaze, Sonny had no idea. He felt that it was rather intense. Her tantalizing lips were so close. She did not exactly move, but he sensed a subtle tension in her muscles, as if she was about to lean closer. The leaves rustled softly all around them, and the setting sun painted by the sky in a million shades of golden radiance. Sonny took a deep breath and said, "I need to tell you something." Just like that, the moment was gone. He sighed. "I said that there were secrets that I might never reveal, but before anything else happens, there is one of them in particular I must share. So." Nephi's remained motionless for a bit, then picked up the bottle of wine and leaned back. Pouring the greenish liquid into a glass, she exhaled slowly and took a sip. Then she smiled faintly. "You don't really have to tell me, I already know." Sonny froze. His heart skipped a beat, no, a few beats. Suddenly, he was a little panicked. Hiding his frazzled state, he forced himself to breathe and asked slowly, "Lady Nephis, what exactly do you think you know?" He had been gathering courage to admit that he was the Lord of Shadows for so long, but she already knew. How? Since when? There were too many thoughts buzzing in his head. Nephis drank more wine and smiled wistfully. "Well, it wasn't that hard to figure out, was it?" She paused for a few moments, then sighed. "Plus, I feel like you've been giving me hints since we met today. I would be a fool not to realize." Her tone wasn't particularly agitated, which was good. However, at the same time, why wasn't it? How could she be so nonchalant? Sonny had been agonizing about this issue for a long time, so he felt a little hurt by the fact that she could remain so calm about it. He also didn't know how she could remain calm. Nephis looked at him and continued, "There are too few people with an affinity to shadows out there, but now I am suddenly surrounded by them. Additionally, you could not have expected me to know, given how rare and arcane this knowledge is. But my experience in the third nightmare allowed me to draw a direct parallel between you and the Saint of Godgrave." Sonny trembled. "What knowledge?" Her smile grew a little gentle. "That mantle you wear looks just like the ritual attire of a priest of the nightmare spell. The mask the Lord of Shadows wears is part of that attire as well. Now, it might be a coincidence for me to stumble on two people with high affinity to shadows, and it might be a coincidence for two awaken to possess memories inherited from the followers of Weaver. But both of these connections can't be a coincidence." He slowly poured the tea into his cup. Indeed, why had he not thought about that? Probably because the nebulous mantle was quite inconspicuous, unlike the eye-catching Weaver's mask. He had not expected anyone to attribute it to the cult of Weaver. But this was Anank's mantle, after all. Nephis knew it too well. Additionally, she had never been supposed to meet the humble shopkeeper. To begin with, their unexpected relationship was the result of a messy series of unanticipated events. So, Sonny had not been as meticulous in maintaining his disguise as he would normally be. She knew all along. The idea was startling. Nephis, meanwhile, finished her wine and poured herself a little more. But mainly, it was the fact that the Lord of Shadows was too well informed about everything that is happening in both worlds for someone who is supposed to be a recluse. Knowledge like that can't be achieved without an information network. So, I figured that he has many agents scattered across the waking world and the dream realm. Sunny blinked a couple of times. Huh. With a sigh, Nephise put her glass down and added in a soft tone. The lineage of Shadow God has never been discovered, at least everyone thinks so, but all these facts hint that it has. I don't know how the Shadow clan managed to remain hidden for so long and why you are starting to move now, but it doesn't matter. What matters? He tilted his head a little. Wait a moment. She looked him in the eyes and smiled. Is that I know that you are an agent of the Lord of Shadows, Master Sunless. But that doesn't really change the way I think of you, so you don't have to worry. Sunny stared at her silently. No, but why does she sound a little smug? And also, she did not care if he was a spy working for the Lord of Shadows. That made him feel warm inside. It was so adorable. He inhaled slowly, then said in a cautious tone, No, that's not it. A hint of surprise appeared on Neff's face. She lingered for a moment, then asked, It's not. Sunny scratched the back of his head awkwardly. What I mean to say is that I am not an agent of the Lord of Shadows. His voice was a bit smooth. I am the Lord of Shadows. Nephise looked at him incredulously. Her expression was deadpan. What? He nodded. Yes, the Lord of Shadows, that's me. We met in Godgrave before we met in Bastion. Her face froze. Nephise remained silent for a while, then asked in a flat tone, How would that even work? Godgrave is so far from Bastion and your tether. Sunny sighed, then manifested the gloomy shadow into an avatar. A moment later, two of him were sitting on the blanket, one wearing nothing but the swimming trunks, the other wearing clothes made from manifested shadows. It's an ability of mine. I have 7 bodies. 2 are here in Bastion, 4 are in Godgrave, and 1 is in the Song Domain. Neff's eyes slowly widened. She stared at the two of him without saying anything, her expression perfectly emotionless. After a while, Sunny asked, Lady Nephise, are you fine? She nodded slowly. Yes, of course. He hesitated. Are you sure? Nephise raised an eyebrow elegantly. Yes, why are you asking? Sunny coughed. Because the river is on fire. The river was indeed on fire. It was quite a strange sight. A vast expanse of clear water was boiling, and more than that, a sea of white flames was spreading across its surface like burning oil. A wave of heat assaulted Sunny like a tide, bathing him in warmth. Neff slowly turned her head and looked at the river, a calm and composed expression on her face. The flames fell and were extinguished under her impassive gaze. Then she cleared her throat. Ah, yes, there was a nightmare creature preparing to surface. I burned it. Her tone was poised and confident. Sunny kept the smile off his face. Oh, I see, of course. Thank you for reacting promptly. His shadow sense was still enveloping the entire area, so he knew perfectly well that there had been no abomination. However, he wasn't going to mention it. Instead, he raised the steaming cup of tea with a trembling hand, gulped it down, and sighed. His avatar silently turned back into a shadow. Well, yes, as I was saying, there is no shadow clan and no information network. Instead, there is just me. My transformation ability allows me to manifest my shadows as incarnations of myself. Nephise stared at him with wide eyes, still struggling to accept the revelation. Her voice turned a little subdued. Transformation ability, so you are a saint. No, of course you are, because you are the Lord of Shadows. She closed her eyes for a moment. Then what about the other forms, the Shadow Colossus, the little crow? I was under the impression that the Lord of Shadows, that you could assume these shapes due to your transcendent ability. Sunny scratched the back of his head. Those forms are made possible by a technique based on my dormant, awakened, and ascended abilities. as well as my aspect legacy. Nephi's took a deep breath, then looked at him sharply. After a few moments of silence, she asked with a hint of agitation in her voice, You are really him, the Lord of Shadows." Sunny remained motionless for a bit, then extended an arm forward. Soul's serpent slithered under his skin, flowing into his palm. Then, the intricate tattoo slowly disappeared, and the black Odachi appeared in his hand. He hesitated for a few moments, then gently placed the great sword on the sand. "Yes, although it would be more appropriate to say that the Lord of Shadows is me." Sunny looked at Nephi's with a pale smile. "I attained transcendence 4 years ago, near the end of the Southern Campaign. After that, well, I was a little done with the world, so I spent a few years wandering the dream realm aimlessly, having no desire to return. But eventually, I did. I sent most of my incarnations to Godgrave, where they battled the nightmare creatures and established a foothold in that damned place. And at the same time, I came to Bastion and opened my shop. That is pretty much it." She looked at him for a while without saying anything. What was she thinking about? Sunny was afraid to imagine. Was she blaming him for fooling her, feeling betrayed? Was she too stunned to understand the meaning of his words? Or was she perhaps all right with it? He did not know. Nephi's, meanwhile, reached for the wine silently. The bottle, not the glass. Nephi's was reeling. She couldn't help but look at Master Sunless. No, Saint Sunless, no, was that even his real name? She couldn't help but look at the charming enchanter and mentally compare him to the sinister, cold, overbearing Lord of Shadows. Sunless was slender, beautiful, and nice. His features were very handsome, but not in a rugged kind of way. Instead, he was gallant and charming in a soft and charming manner. His onyx eyes were usually calm, with a hint of wry humor hidden in their dark depths. Sometimes they were clouded by a veil of strange melancholy, and sometimes they were glistening with sincere mirth. He made Nephi's feel at ease. The Lord of Shadows, meanwhile, was fearsome and imposing. His face was always hidden behind a mask. Sometimes it was a featureless mask that made him look eerily unfathomable, and sometimes it was the ferocious mask of a dark demon. His movements were sharp and powerful, full of ruthless intent. His sinister voice was cold and emotionless. He made Nephi's feel on edge. If there was something in common between the two of them, it was that both of them seemed to be able to stir her emotions. But still, how could the two of them be the same person? How could the gentle Master Sunless have cut down great nightmare creatures without batting an eye? How could the aloof Lord of the Shadows have worn a homely apron and caringly prepared delicious waffles for her, placing a scoop of ice cream and fresh strawberries on top? She was failing to understand. "Ah, my head hurts." Nephi's asked a few questions to buy herself some time to process the impossible revelations. He answered them, but she barely heard the answers. "No way, it can't be, I mean. Yes, I made the connection between the two of them. And yes, Master Sunless, Saint Sunless, he warned me that he has a lot of secrets, but. Mostly, Nephi's felt stunned. There was a subtle hint of humiliation at being fooled as well, or rather, of being a fool. But there was also something else. Beneath the shock and rejection, she couldn't help but think, would it be so bad if the charming enchanter had turned out to be the Lord of Shadows? Nephi's remembered her first meeting with the mysterious saint. She would have lied if she said that he had not fascinated her. His power, his beautiful swordsmanship, his cold arrogance. Back then, she had felt wistful, thinking that it would have been so nice to have a steady partner like that. Someone who could keep up with her, an equal. Of course, she had often wondered what was hiding behind the mask of the Lord of Shadows. It was a bit exciting to imagine. She was quite sure that he was young, but what did he look like? Was his face as cold and emotionless as his voice? Were his eyes as ruthless? Was he handsome? He had to be as a saint. Was he even a human? Nephi's had only been distracted from that fascination after stumbling into an unexpected relationship with Master Sunless, the charming and gentle enchanter, first a fake one, then less and less so. She mentally replaced the ferocious mask with the beautiful face of Master Sunless, Saint Sunless, or whatever his name truly was. He would look so out of place in the heavy onyx armor, wielding the great blade of the dark Odachi. But also it fit so well. His raven-black hair, his porcelain skin, his dark eyes. She could imagine it easily, a beautiful man like him sitting on an obsidian throne in the nameless temple, clad in intricate onyx armor and surrounded by eternal darkness. How did I not realize it before? Nephi's wanted to fall through the ground. She feverishly went over every encounter with the Lord of Shadows, and then put them side by side with the time she had spent with Master Sunless. The way he watched her practice swordsmanship. The way he watched the lonesome tree in the courtyard of the dark temple. The way he seemed to enjoy seeing people eat his food. The way he seemed to prefer the solitude of the nameless temple despite surrounding himself with human-like shadows. She swallowed some wine, not feeling its taste. Wait, Sunless, is that even your real name? Sunless, is that even your real name? Sunny blinked a couple of times. Why does she? But then it made sense. He knew that his feelings for Nephi's were real, and him being the Lord of Shadows did not change them. But for her, she must have been questioning everything she knew about him. Every word he had uttered was under suspicion of being a lie, and every action he had taken was under suspicion of being premeditated and purposeful. That was because, while Master Sunless was merely a person, the Lord of Shadows was something else. He was one of the players in the grand game between the powers of this world. Sunny lingered for a moment, then offered her a fragile smile. Sure, that is my real name. Well, actually, although it is my real name, most people call me Sunny, so I was going to suggest that you call me that too soon today. He faltered, then sighed. Listen, I want to explain something. My intention was never to deceive you. I did not approach you with an ulterior motive, insinuating myself into your good graces for a nefarious purpose. In fact, I never expected to meet you at all. I mean meet you here in Bastion. He wasn't being very eloquent, but there was no helping it. Sunny's mind was in turmoil, and therefore so were his words. He sought a momentary refuge in the act of gulping down tea. It was sort of like this. The Lord of Shadows was supposed to be a part of me that deals with the big picture, while Master Sunless, he wasn't supposed to have any purpose at all. He was just meant to live the life that I have always wanted to live, but was never able to. A quiet and peaceful life away from bloodshed and strife, one that had nothing to do with the sovereigns, the war, the nightmare spell, the gods and the demons, the future. Sunny sighed. I just wanted to manage a small shop and live quietly. Or rather, I wanted to let a part of me experience that bliss at least. So that was what I did, and I never expected that a few days after the Lord of Shadows met you, you would walk into my shop. Actually, I was so startled that I fell like a fool. Neff blinked. That was why you were on the floor. Sunny coughed and scratched his head in embarrassment. Yeah. She stared at him intently. Wait, what about the duel with Tristan of Aegis Rose? He looked down. Oh, that I tried really hard not to hurt him, too much. Nephi's opened her mouth to say something, then closed it again. Then she opened it once more and covered it with a hand, as if mortified. Wait, so when she... Sunny smiled sheepishly. All right, that happened too. It was a bit funny, actually. Effie was in a habit of belittling the Lord of Shadows in an earnest attempt to help outmaster Sunless win Nephi's over. Her clumsy attempts to help missed the mark completely, of course, but were strangely endearing. Although Nephi's had indeed ended up seeing the humble shopkeeper in a favorable light, so maybe Effie actually knew what she was doing. Sonny wasn't sure at that point. Noticing that Nephi seemed to have lost the ability to speak, he hesitated for a moment, and then said softly, "When you walked into my shop, it was like two worlds colliding. Well, and after that, one thing led to the other, and before I knew it, we were in a contractual relationship. I was being knighted, and you were spending more time with me than with the Lord of Shadows, who was supposed to be the only incarnation of mine to face you." He hesitated for a moment. I knew that the best course of action would be to sever that connection and make sure that Master Sunless, the humble shopkeeper, never comes in contact with changing star of the immortal flame again. But I was selfish, and I was greedy, and I went along with the flow, allowing it to pull me closer to you. Nephi's looked at him strangely, something flashing in her eyes. Then a slight frown creased her elegant brow. She mumbled, "Wait, but initially I only trusted you, this version of you, because Cassie had vouched that you could be trusted, and she would not have done something like that without a thorough investigation. How did she miss all these clues?" Sonny almost choked on his tea. Wiping his lips, he put the cup down and glanced at Nephi's carefully. "Oh," he said tentatively. "Actually, Cassie was the first to find out. She made sure that I had no malice toward you and tacitly agreed to keep my secret, for a bit, so that I could tell you myself eventually." The wine bottle was slowly melting in Neff's hand. Her voice trembled a little. "Cassie knew." Sonny smiled awkwardly. "Sorry, Cassie." "Ah, yes, we sort of struck a deal, for reasons, but you should know that she only has your best interests in mind, so if you want to blame someone, blame me. She has really done the best she could. It is me who's at fault." Nephi stared at him silently for a while. Then she stared at him some more. Sonny had a feeling that she was yelling at a certain blind seer currently, in her head. He tried to imagine what Nephi's was feeling. His imagination failed. Surely she was shocked, embarrassed a little, reeling. But maybe, was there no possibility that she was a little happy as well? The Lord of Shadows wasn't her enemy after all. In fact, they had built some trust and rapport in the recent months. They had fought side by side, and he was someone anyone would wish to have by their side on the battlefield. Someone who could support her on her treacherous path, not just treat her to a picnic between the calamitous battles. Wouldn't it feel nice to know that someone like that was also kind and caring to her at least, and that he was willing, longed for, really, to be more than just an ally? Both the Lord of Shadows and Master Sunless were parts of Sonny, and together they made someone who could stand side by side with Nephi's wherever she went and support her in whatever way she needed. In short, "I'm not that bad, am I?" Nephi's inhaled slowly, then said in a subdued tone, "Which one of you is the real you?" Sonny hesitated for a few moments, then said the truth. "All of me is the real me." He looked away. "It would be easy to say that one of my incarnations is a mask and the other one is the true me, but that would be a lie. They are all me, and the only difference between them is the role they have to play. The Lord of Shadows is meant for war, and so he is aloof and unyielding. Master Sunless is meant for peace, and so he is soft and accommodating." Sonny lingered for a moment, and then added quietly, "I guess you can say that one of them is what I want to be, while the other is what I have to be. But that is not really important. What's important is that." He looked at her with a pale smile. "Both of them are me, and I am sincere in my feelings for you. You know it. You should have felt my longing." Nephi studied his face for a long time. Then she nodded slowly. And blushed. "I see, I need to digest it, sorry." "Why?" Before Sonny could react, beautiful white wings appeared behind Nephi's, and she soared into the air, sending sand flying in all directions. "Wait!" he called after her, but she swiftly rose into the sky and then disappeared in the direction of Bastion. Sunny was left alone on the beach, frozen. You. He looked down, remained silent for a while and grimaced. "You forgot to take your dress." "Indeed." Nephi's was in such a hurry to leave that she had forgotten to pick up her white summer dress. Of course, she could summon a memory armor to cover her body at any moment, but still. Sunny sighed deeply. He didn't regret confessing his identity to her. He would have felt uncomfortable going further without doing that. But he did regret it a little. Their perfect date was ruined. And yet, he looked at the sky silently. There at the end. Her reaction wasn't that bad, was it? It wasn't. In fact, it was a little promising. The sky above the Moon River plain was gray and unfriendly. Drops of cold water were dribbling from above, and the winds were blowing above the barren wasteland, howling as they dove into the canyons. Rain sat in front of the crackling fire for a few minutes, staring somberly into the distance. Her body was bruised, but there were no serious wounds. Her mind was clear. It was just that the situation was a bit bleak. Rain sighed heavily, then inspected her surroundings. Well, there wasn't much to inspect. The stony wasteland was nearly featureless. There were a few twisted, dead trees a dozen or so meters away. Beyond that, far away, stood a weathered ruin. The canyon was on the other side, a stone throw away. Next, she inspected herself and grimaced. Rain was wearing her usual leather pants, Henley, wool vest, and jacket. She was not going to suffer from the cold because her body was protected by her worn-out military bodysuit, but her warm coat was still in her pack, which was back with the survey team, full of survival equipment. The last time she had seen her sword, it was impaling the abominable hand to the ground. Her bow and quiver were now somewhere at the bottom of the canyon. The only weapons she had left were the hunting knife in the sheath attached to the small of her back, and a dagger hidden in her boot. It wasn't much. However, what concerned Rain the most was not the lack of weapons, but the lack of simple tools. There was no food or water either. Luckily, there was a young lady from a noble clan. Tamar had to have a few useful memories in her soul arsenal. Rain rubbed her face, then rose and walked over to the unconscious girl. After inspecting her carefully, she scowled and cursed quietly through gritted teeth. Damnation! Tamar wasn't in a good shape. She was not at death's door, but her body was terribly battered. Her face was bruised, and judging by a slight grimace that contorted it with each breath, so were her ribs. One of her arms was badly injured. If not for the vambrace of her enchanted armor, it would have been mangled even worse. Worst of all, both of her legs seemed to be broken. She must have been slammed against the wall of the canyon or had been caught between rocks, being tossed around by the current. Well, it was already a miracle that they had managed to survive. In fact, Rain should have been worse off than Tamar, whose awakened physique was much more robust. Her teacher must have made rescuing her a priority. Rain sighed deeply. She wasn't particularly fond of the haughty legacy, but there was also no animosity between them. So, seeing her in such a sorry state made Rain feel despondent. Tamar had chosen to catch the falling laborer instead of saving herself, after all. If she had been more selfish, she might have avoided getting hurt altogether. Stupid woman! Rain stared at the unconscious girl for a while, then rose and walked away. She returned a couple of minutes later, carrying a few sturdy branches. Awakened were much stronger than mundane people and could recover from many terrible wounds. They healed much faster. Tamar seemed to have already saturated her core, as well, at that despite only awakening a couple of months ago. One of the perks of being a legacy, I guess. She must have received a treasure trove of soul shards immediately after becoming an awakened. Legacy clans were known to provide their young with a lot of support. Granted, not quite to that degree. Clan Sorrow must have liked pampering young Tamar. Or rather, they probably were in a hurry to make her as strong as possible before the start of the war. The thought made Rain feel cold. In any case, Rain wasn't too concerned about the younger girl. She would make a full recovery before too long. However, this was the dream realm. They were lost and far away from other humans. Their situation was rather precarious. Taking off her jacket, Rain hesitated for a few moments and unsheathed her knife. She cut her Henley and then tore off its sleeves with a regretful expression. Finally, she sat down on the ground and started to cut the sleeves into thin strips of fabric, meaning to make them into cords. It was better to set Tamar's bones before she regained consciousness. Once the cords were ready, Rain returned the knife into its sheath and approached the legacy girl. Her greaves and cuisses were in the way, so Rain had to unstrap them. Memory armor was rarely donned and stripped, since Awakened could simply summon and dismiss it. However, that did not mean that it couldn't be taken off normally. Granted, Rain wasn't very familiar with how all these plates of metal were fastened to a human body and each other, so she fumbled a little. She was in the process of trying to remove a greave when something about her surroundings subtly changed. Looking up, she was a little startled to see that Tamar had opened her eyes and was staring at her dazedly. "What are you doing?" The legacy girl's voice sounded hoarse. Rain looked down. "Ugh." From the side, it surely seemed like she was trying to loot the half-dead young lady for a pair of boots, like a complete scoundrel. Rain smiled sheepishly and then said in a friendly tone, "Don't scream." Tamar looked at her in confusion. Then her eyes widened and she let out a stifled groan. The pain had finally caught up with her. "Argaya, damn it." The young legacy slumped on the ground and gritted her teeth, reeling from pain. Rain, meanwhile, let go of the greave and shook her head in dejection. All that work completely in vain. She waved to attract Tamar's attention. "Hey, Lady Tamar, dismiss your armor." Tamar looked at her silently for a few moments. "Why?" Rain inhaled quietly, then tried her best to imitate the tone her mom had used to make her younger self take medicine. "Your legs are broken. I need to set the bones well unless you want them to heal wrong." The young legacy gritted her teeth, then raised her torso and looked down. A few moments later, she fell back on the ground, her face turning pale. There was a long stretch of silence, and then her plate armor collapsed into a whirlwind of sparks, leaving only the cloth underlayer behind. Tamar was left wearing only a simple white shirt and breeches, shivering slightly in the cold. Rain hesitated a little before picking up her jacket and covering the younger girl with it. Then, she looked at her pale face from above. "It's going to hurt a lot. Do you want to bite down on something?" Tamar slowly shook her head. "Just do it." "Well, suit yourself." Rain returned to her feet, picked up on them gently, placed her hand on her calves and said gingerly, "Listen, I'm going to count to 3. 1. Without saying anything else, she pulled. In the next moment, Tamar clenched her fists and let out a string of curses. Or at least she must have thought that they were curses. In fact, this proper young lady had no idea how to properly curse. It was a bit adorable. You said you would count to 3. Rain shrugged nonchalantly. "I lied." Tamar handled the pain surprisingly well. Rain herself was no stranger to pain, but she had never been hurt that badly. She wasn't sure if she could have maintained composure in a similar situation, at least without a dire need to stay composed. Humans were wired to abhor pain, so there was nothing wrong with showing a bit of weakness. But after that first string of curses, the young legacy stayed silent and simply glared at Rain intensely. It was as if she was inviting her to try her worst. "Weirdo." Luckily, Rain was quite good at treating injuries. All children learn the basic treatment procedures in school, and she had been additionally schooled on how to deal with most injuries in the wilderness by her teacher. So, Tamar did not have to suffer unnecessarily. After the bones were set, Rain told her to summon back her boots, and then went about making splints from the branches and cords she had prepared. While she busied herself with it, Tamar finally spoke. "You, Ronnie." Rain glanced at her briefly, then looked back down. "Huh, she remembers my name." "What?" The legacy girl inhaled slowly. "Where are we?" "Good question." Rain hesitated for a few moments, coming up with a believable lie. Sadly, the fact that they were alive was quite unbelievable. But then again, the existence of her teacher was even harder to believe. So, any explanation she could come up with would sound more plausible than the truth. Eventually, she said, "I'm not sure either. Somewhere downstream from where we fought the tyrant. It looks like the river carried us pretty far. When I came about, I was laying on the edge of the canyon with no trace of the others in sight. You were about 100 meters downriver. That's all I know." Tamar remained silent for a while. "How did we survive?" "A petty shadow rescued us from the current, then left us to fend for ourselves in the wilderness, because I hurt his feelings." She smiled faintly. "No idea. I assumed it was because of some powerful life-saving memory you have." The young legacy raised an eyebrow. "There's no such thing." Rain sighed. "That's too bad." Finally finished, she looked at Tamar and shrugged. "Well, we're both alive. Now, we just need to make our way back to the main camp, and then we will even be able to keep staying alive. Isn't that wonderful?" The young legacy looked at her somberly, not saying anything. Rain smiled faintly. "What? Why are you looking at me like that?" Tamar glanced at splints on her legs, then faced her with a grim expression. "We don't even know where we are. The wilderness is teeming with nightmare creatures, and I can't fight. How are we going to get to camp with me like that?" Rain wasn't very concerned. "What's the problem? Summon that echo of yours and let's ride it all the way back." The young lady did not answer. Her silence was a little unnerving. Rain frowned. "Is there a problem?" Tamar simply stared at her grimly for a bit, then said evenly, "I can't summon my echo." Her words sent a chill running down Rain's spine. The giant wolf had been perfectly fine when they fell into the canyon, had it not. The two of them could easily survive the perilous journey with its help. However, without the echo, the situation would indeed be chillingly grim. Being lost in the wilderness of the dream realm with no tools and no weapons, with the sole awakened warrior among the two of them suffering from heavy injuries, making it to the main camp in one piece seemed like a very distant possibility, to say the least. Rain looked at Tamar, her frown deepening. "Why was it destroyed?" The young legacy slowly shook her head. "No, it's not destroyed." Rain lingered for a moment, then rubbed her face tiredly. "Then what's the problem?" Tamar remained silent for a few seconds. "The survey team is lacking a melee fighter now. Ray can do a lot of damage from stealth, but he is not well suited for direct combat. Without that echo, the team will suffer heavy casualties if they can even make it back to the main camp. They won't have a way to cross the canyons either. The mission will fail." Rain stared at her incredulously. After a while, she said, "So, it's not that you can't summon the echo. You won't summon the echo, because you would rather die than put the team and your mission at risk." Tamar nodded. "That's right." A strange smile appeared on Rain's lips. "That is very noble of you, Lady Tamar. It's commendable that you have decided to die for your duty. But what about me? Isn't it a bit strange that you have also decided that I will die to uphold your duty? Doesn't seem very fair." The young legacy frowned. "Have you no loyalty? Those people are your comrades, and our mission is important for the future of the Song domain. We, we must be ready to sacrifice for the greater good." Rain laughed. "Loyalty? I am sorry, Lady Tamar. I am a hired laborer. I get paid a pitiful amount of coins to carry rocks and do tedious chores. Am I supposed to die for the right to carry rocks or for the privilege to do chores? I've been only doing that to put food on my plate. The only thing I'm loyal to is my stomach." Tamar glared at her with indignation, then took a deep breath and grew quiet. Sprawling on the ground in exhaustion and clearly suffering from pain, she remained silent for a few moments, then sighed. "You're right. You are not a legacy or even a soldier, so I can't expect you to understand. Still, I won't compromise the entire survey team for the sake of one member. I won't leave them without the protection of the Echo." Rain sighed inwardly. "Stubborn fool." Tamar, meanwhile, looked at her with a grave expression. "But I also can't expect you to share my burden, so leave me. Your legs are perfectly fine. You stand a chance of making it back alive without me. I've seen your skill, you are not defenseless, so I'll give you a few of my memories. You won't be able to use the enchantments, but they will still be helpful. If you are careful enough and lucky enough, you'll survive." Rain studied her pale, determined face silently. After a while, she asked in a neutral tone, "So that's your plan, to send me off and stay here, immobilized, to die on your own?" Tamar raised her chin arrogantly. "Who says I'll die? I'll crawl and find a good place to hide. In a week or two, the survey team will reach the main camp. Then someone will come to find me. I just need to last for a while." Her tone was confident, but her words did not sound very convincing. Rain did not say anything for a while, then massaged her temples with a grimace. Eventually she said, "Fine, don't summon your damned Echo. Instead, summon a rope, or a cloak, something like that." Tamar frowned in confusion. "A rope, what for?" Rain stood up and raised her hands above her head, stretching her body. She could feel strength returning to her limbs. "Because I am going to drag you to the main camp instead of that Echo, if I have to. You did save my life back in the canyon, after all. I might be a simple porter, but I'm not an ingrate. My mom taught me better." She had decided to stay with Tamar. After all, there should not be a lot of difference between carrying rocks and carrying a slim legacy girl. They were going to make it back together, or not at all. Among Tamar's memories, there was an enchanted cloak. Its enchantment wasn't very useful in their current situation, but the cloak itself was just what Rain needed. Harvesting 2 long branches from the dead trees, she used it to create a makeshift stretcher. Rain held the front end of the stretcher, while the rear end dragged on the ground. For the young legacy, it wasn't the most comfortable way to travel, but if she was suffering, she did not let it show. As for Rain herself, she quickly warmed up from the strain. Hauling Tamar over a long distance in this manner was not very plausible, but luckily, they weren't going far just yet. For now, their plan was to find shelter and wait for about 10 days before summoning the Echo. That much time should be enough for the survey team to return to the main construction camp, or at least get close to it. So, all Rain and Tamar had to do was survive that long. It was especially important that Tamar remained alive, because with her death, the Echo would disappear as well. Then, the survey team would be in peril. Remembering the porters she had become friends with, Rain grimaced. She had put on a cynical facade in front of the young legacy, and although there was some truth to her words, in all honesty, she wasn't willing to save herself by sacrificing those people either. Plus, Rain was not helpless. Although the Moonriver Plain was much more dangerous than the wild reaches around Ravenheart, she still stood a fair chance of surviving here. "I'll take it one step at a time." For now they had to find shelter, then procure food and water. After that, she was going to think about it later. Soon the ruins drew near. They were too large to be a solitary building, but too small to be the remains of a town. Stone walls rose from the ground, once tall and magnificent, now crumbling and covered in cracks. Rainwater was spilling out of the cracks, and it seemed as if the ruins were weeping. There was no telling what that place had been once, and currently, Rain wasn't that interested in solving the mystery. Instead, her gaze fell on the ground and grew tense. Damn it! She stopped without approaching the ruins and gently placed the stretcher on the ground. Tamar's face paled from the jolt, but she stubbornly refused to let her pain show. What is it? Rain studied the ground with a somber expression. A few moments later, she sighed. There are prints on the ground. Tamar turned her head to look. There were indeed traces of something having stalked this area in the mud. The prints weren't too large and were clearly animalistic in nature. Judging by their size and depths, the creature or creatures weren't too large. Still, it was a cause for concern. The ruins Rain had hoped to take shelter in were occupied. The two young women looked at each other silently. Eventually, Tamar asked, "What do you want to do? We can go further away from the canyon." Rain remained silent for a while, then slowly shook her head. "There's no point. Whatever it is that lives in the ruins will be faster than us, by far. Once it crawls out and catches our scent, it will find us no matter how much distance we can cover before nightfall." Which wasn't much distance at all. The state of the paw prints hinted that they had been left many hours, but less than a day ago. So, Rain suspected that the inhabitant of the ruins was a nocturnal predator. Even if she hauled Tamar away with all her strength, they were not going to outrun a nightmare creature. She sighed. "It has to die." Rain looked at Tamar, then asked her to summon her memory weapons. Soon, a small arsenal appeared from sparks of light on the ground in front of her. The brutish Zweihander was a beautiful and fearsome weapon, not to mention utterly deadly. Unfortunately, Rain could barely lift it. She could muster just enough strength to swing it from side to side in a crude and graceless arc, but there was no hope of doing that with any semblance of speed and accuracy, which meant death in an actual battle. To her delight, Tamar possessed an enchanted bow and a quiver of arrows as well. But Rain could not even draw the bow. It was too heavy, and one would have to have a bear's strength to bend its limbs. There was a beautifully austere battle spear as well. Sadly, it was even worse than the Zweihander. While its weight wasn't as great, the balance was different, so Rain almost toppled while trying to lift it. Dejected, she stared at Tamar for a few moments, gaining a new appreciation for the younger girl's slender physique. How is she so strong with a body like that? The young legacy had been brandishing the brutish greatsword with elegant ease, and even jumping over canyons while wielding it. Awakened possessed immense physical prowess, but Tamar seemed especially strong, or at least knew how to utilize her strength especially well. Shaking her head, Rain gave up on the young legacy's main weapons. Instead, she only picked up a Kinjal, a simple double-edged dagger with a straight blade and a sharp tapered tip. It had no guard or decorations to speak of, but there was a lethal beauty to its simplicity. The length of its broad blade was a bit too long to be a dagger, but a bit too short to be a short sword. Rain weighed it in her hand and nodded. "I'm off." Tamar grimaced and tried to crawl off her stretcher. "Wait." She picked up the enchanted bow and pulled the quiver closer to herself, then sat up, facing the ruins. If you can't handle it, draw it into the open. I'll try to bring it down from the ground." Rain studied her for a few moments with a neutral expression. She was trying not to smile. Tamar's intent was gravely serious, but with her legs outstretched and fixed straight by splints, she looked a bit comical, sitting there on the ground like a doll. Eventually, Rain gave her a nod, gripped the enchanted dagger, and headed for the ruins. The shape of the weapon was only marginally more advantageous than her hunting knife. However, It was a genuine memory, and of the ascended rank no less. Even if Rain could not use any of the dagger's enchantments, its sharpness alone would be of great help. Feeling tense and uneasy, she silently entered the ruins. A few moments later, her figure was swallowed by darkness. Tamar was left sitting in the mud, gripping her bow tightly. The jacket Ronnie had lent her fell to the ground, but she could not even feel the cold. Looking down at the jacket, she noticed that it was lined with a fine alloy mesh. The stitching was very neat, but it had clearly been reinforced to become a makeshift piece of protective gear by hand. She stared at the jacket for a few moments, surprised. Tamar was no stranger to all kinds of armor. However, as a legacy, she had always been meant to become an awakened. So, the armor she was knowledgeable about was in the form of powerful memories and defensive aspect abilities. Such a minuscule, mundane method of protection as lining one's jacket with reinforced alloy would have never crossed her mind. It was so strange. Ronnie herself was strange. She seemed too calm and too capable. Most of all, her mental fortitude was entirely out of place. By all accounts, she should have been terrified and on the verge of panicking. It was Tamar who was supposed to be the one to maintain her composure in any situation, as an awakened warrior should. And yet, why did it seem as if Ronnie was more prepared to face the horrors of the dream realm than she was? As if, for her, all of it was just a normal Tuesday. Can she be a Valor spy? That would be reasonable. However, somehow, Tamar did not believe it. She gritted her teeth and faced the ruins. For a few minutes, there was only silence. And then, the silence was torn apart by a chilling roar. Deep within the ruins, a heavy object collided against the stones. She heard a faint sound of something sharp grinding against the ancient walls. One of them seemed to crumble with a loud crack. Tamar raised her bow and prepared to draw the string. A while later, a slender figure walked out of the darkness. Ronnie's clothes were soaked with blood, but the blood was too dark to have come from a human. Her expression was nonchalant. She was wiping the blade of the enchanted dagger on the sleeve of a black military bodysuit as she walked. Approaching Tamar, the strange porter flashed her a smile. "An awakened beast, we were lucky." Tamar looked up, staring at the mundane girl silently. Is that what she calls lucky? An awakened beast was supposed to be a herald of death for a mundane human. Even the government soldiers used heavy suits of mechanized armor and powerful rifles to face one. Soon, Ronnie dragged her into the ruins. Finally sheltered from rain, Tamar felt a little better. They entered a spacious hall in the central structure of the ruin. It was dark inside, but that did not prevent her from seeing the body of a large beast laying on the stone floor. The lower part of its body was buried under rubble, and its throat was savagely slit, seeping with blood. Sitting down on the floor, Ronnie leaned back tiredly. After a few moments of silence, she suddenly smiled. "Here's shelter, and look." She pointed at the dead abomination. "There's food." Her smile dimmed a little. "Now I just need to find water." Even though Rain did not show it, she was still reeling from the short but lethal battle with the awakened beast. A creature like that was not something she had not faced before, but those encounters had always been preceded by careful planning and preparation. Challenging an abomination as powerful as that blind was a chilling experience. Luckily, the beast had been slumbering deeply when Rain entered the ruins. She stalked them silently, found the enemy, and managed to devise a feasible plan without alerting the abomination. Then she cut her arm and stirred the nightmare creature awake with the scent of blood. Luring it out of its lair, Rain toppled a badly damaged stone wall on the beast, burying it under rubble. The enemy was immobilized, even if only for a few moments. So she rushed in, dodged its deadly claws deftly, and sliced its throat open with the sharp blade of the ascended dagger. It all ended in a heartbeat. Rain wasn't even injured much. Of course, she could have very well lost her life. One mistake was all it took to die. If she had hesitated even a little or had been a split second too late to dodge the monstrous claws, the beast would have been gnawing on her bones by now. But it was dead instead. So it all worked out in the end. I don't like it. Rain had grown accustomed to hunting nightmare creatures, but the lack of control in this improvised battle made her feel uneasy. She didn't like gambling with her life. Letting out a sigh, she glanced at Tamar and then went about making a fire. The young legacy had a tinderbox memory, so Rain did not have to go through the tedious motions of forcing the damp wood to catch flame by hand. Soon, the ruin was illuminated by warm orange light, and the two of them were warming themselves in front of the fire. The rain had turned into a dribble by then, so she couldn't collect rainwater anymore, at least not conveniently. It would be easier to wait for the canyon to fill with water once again. She would walk there later. Rain had to scout their surroundings anyway. For now, though, she weighed the enchanted dagger in her hand once again, then sighed and rose to her feet. Wait here. Dragging the carcass of the dead beast outside with some effort, Rain dressed it down and salvaged a fair deal of meat. She had no salt to cure it, and there was not enough wood to smoke it, so most of the meat was destined to spoil shortly. If they were lucky, though, it could last them just long enough. Returning inside, Rain skewered the meat on sticks and began to roast it. It would have been better to do it over coals, but open fire worked as well. Tamar observed her actions silently. All in all, she was holding up well despite the terrible injuries. After a while, the young legacy asked, "Ronnie, who are you?" Rain raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean? I'm a porter. Before that, I was a laborer in the main construction camp. They pay members of survey teams much more, so I volunteered." Tamar scrutinized her for a few moments, then shook her head. "You are too skilled to be a simple porter. Archery, swordsmanship, wilderness survival. Most of all, your mentality is not that of a mundane person." Rain looked at her dubiously. "I'm sorry, Lady Tamar, but have you spent a lot of time with mundane people?" The younger girl frowned. "What do you mean?" Rain smiled and concentrated on the roasting meat. "I mean that you legacies are a bit isolated from the rest of us mundane folks. You grow up being trained by your clans instead of going to school, and only attend the academy for a month or two to make connections with fellow sleepers. Then, you assume an important position and spend all your time surrounded by awakened warriors. So, how would you even know what a mundane person should be like?" She glanced at Tamar and shrugged. "Well, all right, I might be a bit of an outlier, but still, why can't I have great combat skills? Every child in the world is trained to be able to defend themselves. I trained especially diligently, both in school and with private tutors. That was because once upon a time, a nightmare gate opened near me. So I was motivated." Rain paused for a moment, and then added with a shrug, "I worked long and hard to prepare myself for the first nightmare. It was just that my nightmare never came. I wasn't chosen by the spell and remained mundane. There is no inherent difference in skill or determination between mundane people and awakened, wouldn't you say? It's just a matter of luck." Tamar studied her for a bit, then asked, "That might have been so in the past, but the situation is different now. With your talent and skill, you stand a great chance of surviving the first nightmare. So why didn't you apply to challenge one? All you had to do was return to the waking world and let the spell take you. Your training would not have been wasted." Rain remained silent, then sighed. "People don't just risk their lives for no good reason. I value my life a lot, you know, because there is someone out there who treasures it." Her expression turned somber. She hesitated for a few moments, and then added, "My older brother died challenging a nightmare. My parents have suffered enough, so I don't want to risk putting them through that pain again." Rain did not expect the proud Legacy to understand. Legacies were a ruthless bunch, after all. But to her surprise, Tamar seemed to feel her words deeply. The younger girl lowered her head and looked at the ground. After a while, she said stiffly, "And mine too." Rain looked at her in confusion. "What?" Tamar sighed. "My older brother died challenging a nightmare too. He was much older than me and very talented, the pride of our clan. He became a master at an early age and challenged the third nightmare after a while, and died there." Her expression was stoic, but her voice was tinged with heavy emotions. Eventually, the young Legacy shrugged. "Well, the age gap between us was too big, so I did not know him well. I just thought I'd share since you did first." Rain looked at her quietly for a while, then turned away. "Thank you for sharing." With that, she pushed a skewer of roasted meat into Tamar's hand and rose to her feet. "Now eat. I'll go scout the surroundings a bit." Rain left the ruin and explored the area a little, eating the meat as she walked. Eventually, she made her way to the edge of the canyon. All in all, the situation seemed much less dire than she had expected. There did not seem to be any more nightmare creatures around, which meant that they would probably be able to hide in the ruins for many days. Now she just needed to collect water. Sitting at the edge of the canyon, Rain sighed and looked down into its dark depths, waiting for the chasm to start weeping. What will I use to collect water? Unless Tamar has a suitable memory, her helmet will have to do. At that moment, her body suddenly tense, and her eyes widened. Her expression froze, because she saw, out there in the depths of the canyon, a massive shadow was moving. Grabbing onto the rocks with its countless hands, Rain froze, afraid to move. There below her, far away, something was moving in the darkness. Sunlight did not reach that deep into the canyon, but she was still able to discern a vague and frightening shape. The creature was immense and hunched, with countless arms protruding like a sinewy forest from its massive hump. She thought she saw a clawed hand reaching up to grab the weathered rocks, and in the next moment, an echoing sound of rolling stones rose from the canyon. Rain's whole body grew tense. The awakened tyrant they had fought before falling into the river seemed to be alive. Worse than that, it was here now, either by coincidence or because it had followed their scent. For a moment, her heart was drowned with fear. She had battled and slain many nightmare creatures. Most of them were dormant, while some were awakened. The strongest of them had been the huntsman, and she barely survived that fight. There was no chance that she would be able to survive a battle against an awakened tyrant. That creature was not something a mundane person could ever kill. Not even an awakened would face it alone. Even a full cohort was not always enough to deal with a tyrant. To Rain, the hideous abomination was like a herald of death. Still, she forced herself to calm down. Fear was not going to help her. What would, though? Nothing came to mind. Run, we must run. That was the only logical conclusion. Forgetting to breathe, Rain slowly backed away from the edge, trembled as she turned her back to it, and silently rose to her feet. Then she took several cautious steps forward and broke into a sprint. Damn it, damn it, damn it. So much for hiding from danger in the ruins. So much for waiting for 10 days. Not only had danger found them, but it was also of a kind that they had no hope against. Rain glanced at her shadow and hesitated, not knowing if she should say something. Her teacher had been strangely silent since the morning, as if he wasn't there at all. In the end, she didn't say anything. Entering the ruins, she saw that Tamar was laying on the floor, staring at the ceiling with a bleak expression on her face. The younger girl was in terrible shape, so Rain had hoped that she would have an opportunity to rest and recover a little. Sadly, that was not in the cards anymore. Noticing Rain's hurried motions and grim expression, Tamar rose on an elbow and scowled. "What's the matter?" Rain was already rolling the strips of monster meat into her jacket, knowing that hunger and physical strain did not go well together. In the wilderness, food was life, and hunger was death. "Get on the stretcher." She paused for a moment, and then added darkly, "The damned tyrant has followed us. It is climbing up the canyon." Tamar's eyes widened. She froze for a moment, then gritted her teeth and silently crawled onto the makeshift stretcher. Rain threw the rolled jacket to her, then grabbed the handles and grunted. "Ugh." The young legacy girl wasn't exactly heavy, but she still weighed much more than Rain could carry comfortably. Worse still, that weight wasn't distributed evenly between her shoulders and waist, like that of a backpack would. Dragging her to the ruins was a bit of an exercise, but would Rain be able to drag the stretcher across many kilometers of rough terrain? Not without killing herself, most likely. Curse it all. There was no time to think. For now, she had to create as much distance between them and the tyrant as possible. There was still a possibility that the creature had been carried to this corner of the Moonriver Plain by the same current as them, so it could have been here by coincidence. In that case, they still had a chance to escape. If not, let's go. Rain dragged the stretcher out of the ruin and hesitated for a few moments, a lost look on her face. Where were they supposed to head? Every direction was the same except for where the canyon and the tyrant were. So, Rain felt inclined to rush in the opposite direction from the abomination, going west. But she decided to ask Tamar's opinion first. As if guessing her thoughts, the legacy girl spoke quietly from the stretcher. "The canyons of the Moonriver Plain typically stretch from north to south. We have been carried far south by the river, so the main camp should be somewhere northwest of our position." She hesitated a little and then added, "However, we don't know how far we were carried exactly. It may be more prudent to head further south instead. That way, we might reach the edge of the plain and find the Lake of Tears." The Lake of Tears and the great waterfall, Weeping Goddess, were where Clan Sorrow's citadel stood. Rain remained motionless for a few moments, considering her options. The main construction camp of the road crew was northwest of their position. The Lake of Tears was somewhere south. The problem was that they did not know which one was closer. Eventually, she decisively turned south. Her choice was very simple and had nothing to do with distance. She chose the Lake of Tears simply because they would have to follow along the canyon to reach it, which meant that they would most likely not have to cross other canyons on the way. With Tamar incapacitated, crossing even one could become an insurmountable obstacle, not even taking into account that they might end up being pursued by an awakened tyrant. Wasting time was a luxury they did not have. So really, the Lake of Tears was not the best choice. It was simply the only choice. Gritting her teeth, Rain strained her tired body and pulled the heavy stretcher south. At that moment, she was thankful for the cloudy sky and the cold dribble. Even though her face and hair were already damp, the dust covering the stony plain had turned to mud. Because of that, it was easier to drag the stretcher across it. She was still struggling, though. "I'll need to come up with a better way." Somewhere behind them, there were more sounds of rocks falling deep in the canyon. The tyrant was already close to crawling out of the darkness. Rain hurried her steps. In the end, her worst expectations had not come true. But it was very close. The tyrant had not happened to be there by coincidence. It was, in fact, following their scent. Rain saw from afar as its ugly shape rose from the canyon, pulling itself onto the stone with a dozen monstrous hands. The creature looked like a hideous giant that was on the verge of toppling under the weight of its bulging hump. However, it wasn't really a hunchback. Instead, the mound on its back was simply there to allow for countless arms to protrude forward, all ending with terrifying claws. The most eerie part was that the abomination looked vaguely human-like, as if it had been a person once. If it had, then it must have been eons ago. After climbing out of the canyon, the tyrant spent some time wandering near the edge, its oversized head low to the ground. Dragging Tamar away with all her might, Rain couldn't help but glance back into the distance from time to time. She couldn't understand what the tyrant was doing. But when it wandered to the ruins, spent some time there, then stumbled south, she realized something. The abomination was sniffing for their scent. That would mean that they were done for, only it didn't, because there was one detail playing to their advantage. The tyrant was blind. Rain herself had blinded it, putting 2 arrows through its eyes. So, even though the creature seemed hell-bent on following them, it couldn't simply rush in their direction. It had to follow their scent laboriously, stumbling across rough terrain as it forged a path forward. Its hatred seemed to be truly boundless, though, because even after a few hours the ghastly figure could still be seen far in the distance, wandering the plain in search of them. They couldn't lose it. Curses! Rain was slowly increasing the distance between them and the tyrant. Her arms were on fire, as if her muscles would melt at any moment. Her breathing had turned hoarse, and she felt like she was drowning. It took all of her resolve and determination to keep pushing forward, dragging the makeshift stretcher behind her. Just a few hours had passed, and she was already in such a sorry state. So, despite the fact that the distance was increasing, Rain did not feel at ease. That was because she knew that she wouldn't be able to keep this pace up indefinitely. More than that, once the night fell, they would have to stop. She would need to rest. Tamar was not doing too well, either, with her injuries. What she needed was to remain still and recuperate, not be jolted painfully every few moments as her stretcher dragged across bumps and creases. Her broken legs had to be a cause of constant torment. Even if Rain could push through her exhaustion and Tamar could endure the rough handling, it was simply too dangerous to travel across the Moon River Plain at night. Despite the abundance of moonlight, it would still be dark, and the fact that there was a nightmare creature pursuing them did not mean that there would be none ahead of them. Bad, bad, it's bad. Unlike them, the tyrant did not need to rest. It was not afraid of the darkness either. So, Rain had to get as far away from him as possible before nightfall, so that they would not be caught until dawn. What would happen if the abomination did find them? Sucking in a hoarse breath, Rain glanced at her shadow again. Her teacher was mercurial and unfathomable, but she was pretty sure that he would not let her die. What about Tamar, though? Would his benevolence extend to a stranger from a legacy clan? She wasn't sure. The lives of the survey team members were also tied to Tamar's life. So Rain could not stop. I'm going to die. It felt like she would die from the strain, long before the abomination caught her. And yet she persisted. By the time the sun disappeared behind the horizon and the 3 moons rose into the sky, she could barely feel her hands, but she could not see the tyrant anymore either. Rain found a stone mound to shield them from the wind and placed the stretcher down. Then, she simply fell to the ground, breathing heavily. She was so tired that she couldn't move. Tamar wasn't much better, laying motionlessly on the stretcher. Her face was even paler than before. The barren land was bathed in moonlight. In the darkness, its harsh desolation looked beautiful and shrouded in mystery. A myriad of bright stars shimmered in the sky, veiled here and there by heavy clouds. Ronnie, are you alive? Tamar's voice sounded weak. Despite everything, Rain couldn't help but chuckle. It seemed so. After a while, she asked in a subdued tone, Do you think that the Queen's authority extends this far? If we die, will we turn into pilgrims? Tamar remained silent for a while, then said evenly, Of course, otherwise you would have already fallen into the first nightmare. Rain sighed. She couldn't argue with the truth. Some time later, she finally mustered enough strength to sit up. Leaning on the cold surface of the stone mound, Rain stared at the sky dejectedly. She was suffering from thirst even more than she did from physical exhaustion, so she hoped that rain would come. With a name like mine, can't the heavens be a little merciful? A strong enough downpour could wash away their scent as well. Deciding to be optimistic, Rain asked Tamar to summon her helmet. They consumed some of the remaining meat in silence. Afterwards, the young legacy looked at her somberly and said in a subdued tone, "You can just leave me behind and save yourself, you know." If Rain wasn't slowed down by the need to drag her wounded companion along, she would have had a much higher chance of escaping from the tyrant. That much was obvious. She scratched the back of her head and answered half-heartedly, "Aren't we heading for the Lake of Tears? That is where your clan's citadel is located. What am I supposed to say if I show up there alone? Sorry, I left your daughter to die because she was too heavy. I doubt they'll welcome me warmly after that." Tamar looked at her silently for a few moments. Unexpectedly, a faint smile eventually appeared on her face. "I'm not that heavy," Rain sighed. "And I'm not that strong. Now go to sleep. You need rest. We'll move on at dawn so there's no time to waste. I'll take the first watch and wake you up at midnight." Tamar wanted to say something, but just nodded silently in the end. It had been a terribly long day, and she must have been mentally exhausted from dealing with the pain and mental burden. Soon, her eyes closed, and she swiftly fell asleep. Rain studied the sleeping girl's face for a few minutes, then took a deep breath and stared into the darkness. Despite the terrible fatigue, despite being tormented by thirst, she still knew what she had to do. If you want to get out of here alive, all you need to do is awaken. That was what her teacher had said. So Rain sat motionlessly, felt the flow of soul essence within her, and concentrated deeply, making it revolve faster and faster. After a while, she felt cold drops falling on her face. A minute later, the rain had turned heavy, shrouding the world with a rustling veil. Never losing control of her essence, Rain smiled, picked up Tamar's helmet, and crawled out from beneath the overhanging stone ridge. Placing the helmet on the ground, she allowed the downpour to pelt her freely, and continued to force her essence into a raging whirlpool. Deep within her soul, another grain of sand was being formed. Teacher is always right. Despite how tired Rain was, how badly she needed reprieve, she still sat on the ground and circulated her essence. Her body was absolutely motionless, but her soul was like a raging whirlpool. At the heart of the whirlpool, soul essence was being refined into solid form by the crushing pressure. There were plenty of radiant grains there already, sparkling like gemstones as they spun and collided. Rain could almost hear the melodious ringing and feel her soul tremble slightly with each clash. However, the brilliant gemstones were unable to fuse yet. There weren't enough of them for that to happen. She had to create more. But it was such a slow and arduous process. Rain was already doing much better than anyone was supposed to. After years of slaying nightmare creatures, her essence was especially potent. Her control of it was both forceful and intricate, remarkably precise, at least for someone below the ascended rank. All she needed was time. Sadly, Rain wasn't sure that she had any time left. "I'm not fast enough." Deeply concerned, she gritted her teeth and concentrated wholly on controlling her essence. When the moons reached the apogee of the cloudy sky, she allowed the raging whirlpool of her soul to dissipate and slumped, feeling like she was about to pass out from fatigue. Dragging Tamar's conical helmet over with a weak hand, she drank half of the water that had accumulated inside and finally felt alive again. A little. Then Rain woke the young legacy up and curled on the ground, instantly falling asleep. In the morning, her entire body felt broken. Rain had told Tamar that they would move on as soon as dawn broke, but in the end, they spent more time under the rock outcropping. Rain knew that she wouldn't endure another day of dragging the stretcher with her hands, so something had to be done. After thinking for a while, she unsheathed her hunting knife and carefully separated the alloy mesh from the lining of her military jacket. The alloy wire was very fine, but incredibly durable. She spent a lot of time patiently dismantling the mesh with the help of Tamar's enchanted dagger, then weaving the wires together. In the end, Rain was left with several meters of crude alloy rope. The young legacy was observing with an incredulous expression. Her pallor had become a little better, but she still looked terrible. In fact, both of them did. Tamar had always maintained a valiant and dashing image, quite in line with her exalted status as the daughter of an old legacy clan. Rain might not have had the same background, but she still endeavored to look if not refined, then at least decent. Now both of them were dirty and wretched. They were covered in mud from head to toe, with sunken eyes and chapped lips. Their hair was damp and tangled. Their clothes might have had color once, but now they were indistinguishable from the surrounding dirt. It was a complete disgrace. Looking at Rain, then at herself, Tamar smiled faintly. "Aren't we a sight to behold?" It was good to see that she still had enough spirit to be humorous in this situation. Continuing to weave wire rope, Rain smiled as well. "Indeed, aren't we lucky that the tyrant is blind? At least it won't be offended by our appearance when it eats us." Listening to Tamar chuckle in a weak voice, she fashioned one end of the wire rope into a simple harness, then secured the other end to the stretcher. Putting the harness on herself, Rain gave it a cautious tug. Much better. By then, she could already see the hideous giant far away in the distance. The abomination had not lost track of them despite the heavy rain. It was still following their scent, albeit a little slower. "Of course it is. We have to go." Tamar had seen the tyrant as well. Rain noticed that she never looked at it directly, keeping the creature in the periphery of her vision, just like Rain herself had been trained to do by her teacher. Many nightmare creatures could sense when a gaze was directed at them, so she had been taught to never look at abominations directly when stalking them. I guess legacy training has something in common with mine. She wondered who had it tougher, and decided that it was probably her. Helping Tamar onto the stretcher, Rain took a step forward. The wire rope dug into her skin, but it was much easier to pull the stretcher that way, which was not to say that it was easy. Rain still struggled against the heavy weight. She sighed quietly and gritted her teeth. Hooking her fingers under the wire rope to spare her chest and abdomen from being cut by it, she leaned her body forward and pulled. Rain was like a beast of burden, and the stretcher was like a strange mud sled. She was curious to see how long she would endure. Step, step, another step. 1,000 steps. More. The world narrowed down to a patch of drying mud in front of her, the feeling of the wire rope cutting into her shoulder, and the depleting struggle to pull the stretcher forward. The air flowed into her lungs as she breathed hoarsely. For a while, her mind was empty of thought, full of only the harsh sensation of physical strain. Rain was doing fine for an hour or two, but then a sense of deep, suffocating exhaustion slowly seeped into her muscles, filling her body with lead. The horizon seemed as distant as it had been before, and the barren wasteland was unchanged. She felt like she had made no progress at all, and therefore her silent torment felt endless. The lumbering silhouette of the blind tyrant was still following them, far behind, prowling low to the ground. Rain pushed forward stubbornly. But at the same time, a cold realization sent chills running down her spine. It's hopeless. She wasn't one to give up without a fight, but she also knew better than to fight a hopeless battle. And this desperate struggle of hers was already lost. Rain might be able to stay ahead of the tyrant for a while, maybe for a day or even a few, but sooner or later the abuse she was putting her body through would take its toll. At some point, she wouldn't be able to keep the pace anymore. Then she wouldn't be able to take another step or even rise from the ground. That was if nothing else killed her before that happened. So all she could do was keep walking forward and pray that some miracle would save them. Maybe, if she bought enough time, they would stumble on a passing saint who happened to be traversing the Moon River Plain by chance. Maybe another abomination would get into a fight with the tyrant, dealing it a grievous wound. Maybe. They would get lucky. But Rain was not willing to entrust her life to dumb luck. She had to think of something. She continued to pull the stretcher across the mud, slowly forcing her mind to wake up from the numb slumber. There had to be a way out. There always was. After a dozen more steps, or maybe 1,000. Rain's dark eyes suddenly glistened with ferocious determination. Actually, Rain already knew what miracle could save her. It wasn't a miracle that could happen to her, but rather a miracle she could make happen. It was her awakening. Just like her teacher had said, it was the only solution to this lethal predicament. The problem was that the formation of her soul core was far away, while the tyrant was too close. The abomination was not drawing closer yet, but it would soon. If Rain could rest with no distraction and concentrate on meditating steadily, there would have been hope of awakening before the hideous giant caught its prey. But she had to escape from it, dragging Tamar across the wasteland, from dusk till dawn. She had to rest at night to recover at least some of her strength, so there were only a few short hours for her to circulate her essence while keeping watch. Those hours were woefully insufficient for the task at hand. But actually, wasn't she looking at it all wrong? Rain remembered the previous night, the cool sensation of water droplets falling on her face, the joy she felt. Back then, she was circulating her essence. She took Tamar's helmet and moved it from below the overhanging stone ridge to catch the rain, hopping to quench her unbearable thirst. Which proved something vital. It was that she could move and control her essence at the same time. As long as her concentration wasn't broken, Rain could do whatever she wanted while forming her core. Of course, it wasn't easy to keep her essence under control when doing something else. It was already hard enough to maintain the raging whirlpool while in a state of perfect peace, not to mention extremely tiring. And yet, if she could circulate her essence while traversing the wasteland, then she wouldn't just have a few pitiful hours at night to form her core. Instead, she could keep forming it constantly, for as long as her mental fortitude allowed it. Rain felt a strange compulsion to laugh and cry at the same time. Of course, why not? She was already doing something unprecedented by trying to awaken without the help of the nightmare spell. As far as Rain knew, no other human of the waking world had ever done that. And yet, she didn't just have to perform that miraculous feat, but also do it while being pursued by an awakened tyrant and dying from physical exertion, lost in the wild reaches of the dream realm with no help, hope, or support. It wasn't fair at all. But it also made sense, in a strange kind of way. After all, making history was not supposed to be easy. I can do it, I must do it. I have no choice but to do it. Rain gritted her teeth. And then, ignoring her terrible fatigue and suffocating strain, she reached into her soul and tried to move her essence. The heavy mental and spiritual burden was instantly added to the crushing hardship of pushing her tired body forward. As soon as she took the next step and felt the wire rope cut into her skin painfully, her concentration was destroyed, and she lost control of her essence. Rain took a laborious breath, gripped the rope tighter, and tried again. This time she managed to keep hold of her essence, but lost control of her abdominal muscles, allowing them to relax. She instantly lost balance, stumbled, and sprawled in the mud. "Ugh!" Tamar's subdued voice resounded from behind, tinged with concern. "Ronnie, are you all right?" Rain exhaled slowly, then pushed herself off the ground and wiped the mud off her face. Well, with how dirty her gloves were, she might have just added more mud to it. "I'm fine." Pulling up the alloy harness, she gripped it again and pulled the stretcher forward. She did not make the same mistake the second time. It was terribly difficult and ruthlessly hard, but after a while, she managed to take several steps without losing control of her essence. Then a dozen steps. Then 100. And finally, Rain forced herself to keep walking and circulating her essence at the same time. Her vision had turned blurry, and her mind felt as if it would collapse from strain. But it did not. Her body did not crumble either. So she kept walking. After a while, her hearing seemed to have turned incredibly sharp. She heard the makeshift stretcher scraping against rocks. She also heard the melodious ringing of crystals of essence colliding with each other. She could almost hear the roar of the radiant whirlpool as it revolved within her soul. Eventually, she did not know how much time had passed. She thought that she could feel her essence with incredible clarity, like she had never felt it before. The sensation of it flowing through her, within her, was almost physical. And so, it was almost as if her body and soul became one, indistinguishable from each other. When that happened, she pushed her essence harder, making it revolve even faster. The pressure at the heart of the whirlpool increased, and the speed with which the next grain was being formed increased as well. Much more importantly, Rain wasn't limited to meditating a few hours a day anymore. She could keep the process of core formation at all times, while she walked, while she talked, while she rested her weary body on the ground. As long as her will held, she did not have to stop. The question was, what would take longer, for her will to shatter or for her soul core to be formed? Rain was going to find the answer, whether she wanted to or not. As night fell, so did she. Rain collapsed on the ground, unmoving. This time, she remained motionless for far longer than yesterday. It felt like her body had shut down. She had never been so utterly beaten before, or exhausted so terribly. And yet, she still continued to control her essence, never letting its current stop or slow down. After a while, Tamar awkwardly crawled over to check on her. The legacy girl helped Rain turn over, supported her to sit up, and shoved a strip of meat into her hands. "Eat." Rain smiled weakly and forced herself to take a bite. The tyrant had fallen behind in the latter half of the day. Her speed had been greater with the harness, and she had covered much more distance. It was still nowhere near enough to escape the pursuit, but at least they would survive another night. Probably. They even had some water left. After quenching her thirst and consuming enough meat to refuel her depleted body, Rain sprawled on the ground and sighed. I'm going to be terribly skinny by the end of it." Tamar stared at her with an incredulous expression. "That's what you're concerned about." Rain considered laughing but found the thought too tiring. "In the end," she said. "Why, of course. I want the tyrant to be left hungry after it gobbles me up. Skin and bones, that sort of thing." The young legacy remained silent for a few moments, then sighed. "You have a very morbid sense of humor, don't you, Ronnie?" Laying on the ground, Rain grinned. "What can I say? If you live with wolves, you'll howl like a wolf. Someone has been a bad influence on me." After a while, she added, "I'm sure I'm pretty delicious, though." Tamar had her usual stoic expression on, but at that moment it cracked a little. Looking away, she suppressed a chuckle and said in a serious tone, "I'm sure you are." As she did, Rain felt another radiant crystal being formed deep within her soul. The melodious ringing was growing louder and more frequent. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story, and if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.